Recording in progress. Okay, wait. English. Become a Yankee. Okay. Burgers. Diabetes. Okay, I'm good.
No, you gotta stay as Slavic as possible.
Yes, no problem. Speak the London language.
We think that ideology is something blurring, confusing our straight view. Ideology should be glasses which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should be the opposite. Like you take off the glasses so that you can finally see the way things really are.
Welcome to the One Dime Podcast. I'm here with my friend and comrade, Ugopnik. He is a Eastern European YouTuber who makes fantastic videos. And when I first stumbled on his videos, I could kind of tell that we thought very similarly, especially regarding the topics that we'll be discussing in this podcast. Most notably, morality and how liberal morality in particular often plagues the left's judgment. So how are you doing, Ugopnik? And just give us a little introduction about what exactly you do and who you are.
Well, thank you, Wandine. This is an absolute pleasure, like every time when I have a conversation with you. My name is Ugopnik. I run a YouTube channel by the same name. I'm also on Twitter at Ugopnik. I make videos usually analyzing capitalism, criticizing it from the inside, but also videos about socialism, and sometimes I dive into even criticism, obviously, of fascism. My background is both in the corporate world, and I do have a formal education in business, but also a formal education in political science, which I try to combine in order to create an as materially based objective analysis of the current situation in which we find ourselves in as a species in general. So yes, if you're interested in these sorts of topics, please do check out the channel. And yes, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I highly recommend for those who don't know already to check out Ugopnik's channel because he's been on the grind for like 2 or more years, and now his channel is taking off and the hard work's paying off. And it's really beautiful to see, honestly. I honestly thought just kind of random. I thought your name was Ugopink for the longest time, just because I'm a little dyslexic, I think. I was reading it Ugopink, and but because it's like the PNIK is a little bit confusing, but it's Ugopnik. How'd you get that name, by the way?
Well, it's kind of a combination of, I guess, who I am. I'm what here on the Balkans we refer to as Yugo-nostalgic, meaning usually younger generations, but also generations that lived during Yugoslavia, missing that sort of period in our local history. Definitely missing it because contrasting to how we live right now, it was almost, one could say, undeniably better, at least when it comes to the working class. But yes, so the first part of the name is Yugo, from the name Yugoslavia of the country. And the other part that kind of blends in, which is Gopnik, is pretty much most people online know what a Gopnik is the Slavic / Russian stereotype of a semi-aggressive, semi-stupid local, dude that has absolutely nothing to do all day except drink beer, vodka, and harass passerbys, which is a direct consequence of the incredible vast desert, which is the job market in Eastern Europe in capitalism. So yes, I am very much so a degenerate alcoholic and a Yugo-nostalgic, and those two put together makes Ugopnik.
You know, what's wild is I had a friend in university, Serbian friend, and his name on Instagram was Young Gopnik. So that makes a lot of sense, actually.
That is incredible. Maybe I'm him. You never know.
People miss socialism. How wild is that? I thought capitalism was perfect. Neoliberal capitalism was the end of history. Socialism was just famines and people dying and millions of babies getting killed for no reason, right?
That never happens in capitalism, obviously. Absolutely never. Yeah, that's a topic that can stand on its own. But definitely, a lot of people that had very objective, very good criticism of the application of the ideology, both here and more to the east, were very disappointed once the change kind of entered in the local countries and in the local regions, because certain countries used to be one country, now they're like 10 countries. But definitely, I think even though they're a liberal movie maker, one director of a very good film where they find these bodies of dead Nazis that the communist partisans killed during World War II. I watched the movie ended, it was on a film festival, and she said beautifully in the end, even though, she didn't know what proper terms to use, but I still liked it a lot. She said, we wanted democracy in the 90s, but the only thing we got was capitalism.
That's really interesting. It's like your whole videos, a lot of your videos really do a good job at highlighting just how disappointing capitalism is, particularly the video, how capitalism makes shit products. Which just kind of like disproves the whole innovation argument, and how like actually capitalism incentivizes planned obsolescence, so like deteriorating quality. But your video, how capitalism sells you poverty as modesty and why equality is not a practical goal, really signaled to me that you are a leftist who views these problems through not just a moralistic standpoint, which I really think, which it really is the basis of Marxist historical materialism or dialectical materialism. And that's something surprisingly you would think on the left, which we're supposed to be these cultural neo-Marxists, right? You would see more of that, but actually a lot of the left, I think, is really plagued and controlled by a liberal sense of morality, where moral arguments is what really drives the movement and what drives the argumentation, as opposed to material arguments and analysis. And your video is good at like picking apart particularly capitalist morality, how the idea of modesty, right? It's good to be modest. It's good to be poor. They sell you that as a bit of a virtue, so you stay poor. And that, yeah, we'll get into that. But like, what was your thesis in that video exactly?
Well, when I started making it originally, I was afraid that I'm going to get a lot of backlash because of exactly what you said. A lot of Marxists engaging into both the idea in general and in applicable Marxism through the lens of how we should do it and what the end goal is, should be seen from the currently understood and accepted wider moral principles. So instead of engaging in dialectics and actually trying to completely materially see where this morality is coming from and challenging it on every step, I feel like a lot of people on the left have accepted capitalist or liberal, and in the worst case, conservative morality, and have sort of completely given up on trying to question that whole setup system in general. So when I dived into that, I started thinking, reading, also reflecting on previous sorts of readings that I have done in different schools of thought. And the thesis I kind of indirectly came to is that the system itself, the way it is, manages to actively use almost every single immoral idea or idea which they consider immoral against people who actually want to do something about changing or improving that given system. At one point, it even ends up uniting certain individuals, but for all the wrong reasons, and through that takes away any of their potential revolutionary capabilities. And what I specifically dive in on this video is where I talk about modesty, which was introduced kind of as a massive scam, at least in Western civilization, through the church. Both the Catholic, the Orthodox, and then all the other Christian denominations, where the king and the monarch was allowed to live lavishly because he was chosen by God, or she, if it was a queen. The priesthood got to live also of the money of the peasantry, because again, they were representatives of God, but all others should accept modesty as a pure virtue, because they will be given the wealth of heaven once they die. And that has rolled and rolled and rolled up until the 21st century, where we somehow are introduced to this idea that we should praise poverty, that we should praise not having enough, or not having even the basic line. So that's something that kind of fucking irks me a lot. Sorry for cursing if it's not allowed.
That's fine.
Thank you. It irked me a lot, and which led me to actually making the video specifically because a lot of people, for some bloody reason, conflate modesty as a concept with the socialist movement, and they think that we are fighting for some sort of right to be equally poor, which we absolutely do not. This is not a movement which fetishizes living in squalor. Quite to the opposite. I was trying to make the argument that a socialist is as the current online meme goes, the alpha super mega giga chad who does not like the way the fucking system is right now and the way it is stealing from his fucking bread every single day. And the socialist wants both betterment for all those around him, but also for himself. And he does not do that out of modesty or wanting to put others down so that they become as modest as he is. But no, he does it, or she or them, because they want to elevate themselves to a status which the current system does not allow them to do, which is, at the end of the day, in complete contrast to modesty.
Yeah, well, that's the way I like to view it is Marxists don't hate rich people because they're rich. They hate rich people because of, well, they hate the concept of capitalism rather, because of the way capitalists generate income,
Exactly.
Wealth most of the time. And that's through the labor of others, right? It's not just because they're rich. And at the same time, you know, the poor aren't good just because they're poor.
Yes.
I mean, some of the shittiest people in the world are poor. There's shitty rich people. In Marx and Engels, they rarely, I don't think they ever even, not in the manifesto or really in Capital, really use the word good and bad
At all.
to
Exactly.
make moral judgments. Mm-hmm. It's not what they do. And the thing is paradoxically, a lot of the left does apply this sort of logic. And I have a bit of a theory which is a little bit similar to yours, and it's kind of influenced by Max Weber and Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. And that I think Christianity never really died, but rather two strands of Christianity one occupies the left, one occupies the right. And I think for the right, it was largely Calvinism. So, you know, Calvinism is what got really popular in England and Germany after Catholicism, which was more so the idea that, oh, you know, being rich and selfish is good. You want to, if you're not working, you're doing something wrong. If you're not suffering, you're doing something wrong. You have to always be making more and more money. The wealth is actually a virtue. Whereas Catholicism, which was more or less the popular interpretation of Christianity before, and largely how society was governed in the West, was that being rich is actually a sin. And so it's a more direct interpretation of Jesus, is that like Christianity is, being wealthy is a sin. You go to hell if you're wealthy. But the way the preachers sold this is that don't worry about, you know, the royalties and the merchants having way more wealth than you. They'll go to hell. But the people who are poor, they will go to heaven. So don't worry about it. The meek shall inherit the earth.
Exactly.
And of course, in modernity, we supposedly left behind religion. It's no longer a state religion. We're a society of science. But I think these two currents are very present today. It's interesting to me just because we see that a lot. The rhetoric, for example, I think you can see this ideology in the solutions people propose, because when it comes to the rich, people just talk about taxing the rich, right? Taking money from the rich. But it's not about letting the working class, which, as I know you have a video on this, and in Marxian terms, the middle class is also the working class. Anyone who works for a wage, lives primarily off of wages, lives primarily off of labor, is part of the working class. Marxism wants the working class to basically control the means of production, to control the society, to control their economic life. The goal of Marxism is freedom, right? In this regard. So it's not just taking from the rich, but you see that the solutions is really about, just taxes. And I think the fact that a lot of people can't see past that, they can't see seizing power. Like, it's about empowering the 99%. It's not just about we do want to take the wealth of Jeff Bezos, but that's not just because Bezos is bad because he's so successful. It's because where does he make that wealth, right? He makes it off the back of all those Amazon workers. So that's kind of our point, but it's interesting. I think videos like yours are necessary just because there is this tendency on the left to fetishize poverty. I don't want to say it that harshly, but rather just to kind of assume the poor are good and the rich are bad. And while you can find elements of both, I think that's the wrong analysis. It's more that, the whole, and it's not, I don't think it sells as an idea, because you see the right often attack this. They think that, leftists are just envious people who hate rich
They don't
people.
want you to be rich. If you're smarter than your neighbor, the leftist doesn't want you to make more money. I mean, it is relative. I mean, it's horrible criticism, but it works for their side of the aisle. But at the end of the day, I just want to attach to what you're beautifully putting out into the ether is, when analyzing the current situation from a completely moralistic perspective, we only look at the end result, and then we say, okay, how do we now fix the end result in order to make it not as bad as it currently is, instead of looking at the actual causality which led to those symptoms. So people sit down and say, Jeff Bezos is the fucked up motherfucker. He has a $500 million yacht, while over in Gaza, people are getting, evicted out of their homes on a daily basis. So they are only looking at the symptoms of capitalism, and they want to change it by, for example, as you noted, taxing the wealthy more and more and more. Instead, by doing material analysis, we should go to the root cause of this disease, and by not allowing indirectly certain people to accumulate so much wealth, not by going to them and saying, oh, you can only accumulate X amount of money, but by quite literally taking away the tools of exploitation which they have found themselves with, we will stop the end result of happening. And that is the main difference, not the main, but one of the many differences between the material analysis of the world and trying to fight the root cause of certain things, and moralism, which waits for somebody to get stabbed or killed or attacked or robbed, and then wants to solve it afterwards. Marxists want those things to not happen in the first place.
Yeah, and they also have completely different ways of getting to their conclusions, right? And I think that's like the differentiation between liberalism and Marxism, is that liberals start off with the abstractions in their heads. And they kind of often inadvertently really they might just package it as logical and empirical, but it's often really a moralistic argument about what kind of ideals should be strived. And, we could say they didn't call themselves as socialists, but like left liberals who Engels pejoratively calls utopian socialists, people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Charles Fourier, they advocate for a sort of utopian just society with equality, but they do so kind of with these principles, these abstract principles, which aren't really materially all that sound. They're hard to define. And they do so kind of in this idea that, the poor are working this much and the people getting rich, it's immoral. But the problem is wow, we can believe that. And I do. That's, I guess you could say, my morality to an extent. But the thing about morality is that some people are going to hate this. Some people who are maybe like absolute liberal idealist philosophy nerds will try to say you can you can argue morality using Kantian categorical imperative or whatever. But like the practical truth, I think, is that morality is largely relative. And that's kind of what people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Michel Foucault, postmodernist, proto-postmodernist, you could say, kind of show us. You have all these interpretations of these principles, right? Of this morality. So it doesn't, but what really dictates it? It's not who has better morality. How do you justify who has better morality? It's who has more power. So that's why I don't really like to even focus too much on morality as a left cause or a basis of our argumentation, because really who has power, and this is a core part of Foucault's work, that's who has the power decides what the dominant morals are, and they'll do what they want regardless, and they'll use morality as like a superstructure, and what we call, us Marxists will call, it's like a superstructure to justify what they're already going to do. So the left, maybe instead of just talking about making things on a moral basis, we should use a material, actual analysis of why things are the way they are, not just the way they should be. And also, we have to argue in terms of concrete realities, because these things exist outside of interpretation, right? We can, like the way Marx, for example, demonstrates exploitation and the labor theory of value, is just showing that objectively for the capitalists to get a certain level of surplus value, they have to pay people less than what they are actually producing, right? That's a concrete analysis. And when you show these things, or when you show the objective consequences of capitalism, like environmental destruction, this will happen, right? Not just, we shouldn't harm the planet because it's bad. We need to save the planet. The planet doesn't give a fuck.
Absolutely.
We are objectively going to die.
Yeah, fuck the planet. It fucking lets me live 70, 80 years. I want to live at least 800. Everything wants to kill me all over the place. But I need the planet in order to live. I want future generations to be able to live. This is not a moralistic approach. It is one of purely looking reality in the eye. Same with the labor theory of value. If you ask not one guy, if you explain the labor theory of value to one specific person with one specific moral compass, they're going to tell you, oh my God, that's super right, that's super fucked up, he is explaining, blah, blah, blah. When you talk to someone else who might have had more, I don't know, business experience, or knows some people who are business owners, or is a business owner himself, he will say, oh no, that argument doesn't make sense, because from my moral perspective, I am the person giving these people jobs. They would be, for example, homeless. That's the argument, moral, personal, subjective argument that they would make. No, if we start engaging in that conversation, then if there's 100 people at the table talking about this, there's going to be 100 opinions. No, labor theory of value dictates that the worker, the proletariat, is being exploited every time they engage in a capitalist enterprise. So if we are workers, it is in our interest to not want that to continue. And it is in our interest to be, therefore, Marxist, not because it's so evil that our boss is making us starve. No, because it is in our interest to do so, and we should do so.
Yeah, that's also the other problem, right? Is that moral argumentation, which is often the way left liberals think, it always leads, whether intentionally or not, to individual judgments.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is we end up having this binary thinking of good billionaires, bad billionaires. And then we might, start to see this individual, capitalist, small business owner, he's a capitalist and he makes money off workers, therefore he's evil. And then you can, this type of judgment is dangerous, it's not just unproductive, because it blames individuals rather than the systemic incentives, but it could also be dangerous in the future. It could lead to, innocent people getting killed. Like, I don't think small business owners should fucking get killed just because they're small business owners. They're participating in a system. The point is the system is unjust. People will do what they got to do to survive at the end of the day, you know? Like, if you can get the money without being a capitalist, that's certainly preferable, but it's not productive. You know, it's dangerous, but it's also not productive if we're trying to get people on our side, because I think we're never going to really get the upper capitalist class on our side. I don't think.
Maybe like
but
three
like
people.
The small business class, like
yes, sorry for interrupting.
I think it's always no worries. I think it's worth getting like those, you know, what could be called petite bourgeoisie or whatever, like the small business owners on our side. Is that, you know, they're also in many ways kind of, especially now as capitalism gets more monopolistic.
Exactly.
They're getting out of business. Their lives are getting destroyed. A lot of their lives got destroyed.
Yeah, they will be proletarianized very quickly. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And that's another reason why I think it shouldn't just be like, you know, a kind of moral judgment. And also, I think moral judgment also in many ways has a lot to do with cancel culture, because, you know, when we get into space of judgment, we think that it's somehow productive just to kind of get rid of anyone who doesn't have the purity as us or whoever's, you know, doing the canceling. Instead of really focusing on the systemic critiques, and more important, is changing the power relations. That requires changing power. I don't think you can do that with morality, really. You can't really convince people with power, with morality, that they will stop doing what you want. Like, no amount of moral argument is going to make, you know, Jeff Bezos nationalize Amazon. No amount of moralizing is going to make, I don't know, Apple break its business up into smaller worker cooperatives. No amount of moral convincing is going to convince Kamala Harris and Biden to, you know, adopt socialistic policies. Like, it's just not how it works.
I could not agree more. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to add. Perfectly put, my friend.
Now, there's
just the thing is, like, I might repeat myself, but history is not changed through simple, you know, discussion and a battle of ideas where the greatest one wins.
We need to challenge power. So that's a discussion as well. And I think really ever since the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of socialism more broadly, we don't really see that at all. Like, I think in the 1990s, the early 2000s, was the anti-globalist movement, largely carried by, you know, nonpartisan leftists, a lot of social democrats, a lot of anarchists as well. There wasn't really concrete material demands. There just wasn't. I mean, a lot of it was a moral argument against global capitalism, moral arguments against war, but not a real effort to, you know, get left-wing figures in power, get more working class policies accomplished, or even what those policies were. So I think that's another thing we need to learn from is like, yeah, like maybe we need to look at the concrete material reality more as opposed to the moralism. And that's something that, you know, maybe to us it sounds obvious, but it's really not. If you look at the left, the state of the left in the West, it's
definitely is. I mean, unfortunately, I don't want to sound too brutal or whatever, but we need tens and even hundreds of brilliant, kind minds like Martin Luther King to come out, speak the truth, and then unfortunately be completely silenced by the system, sometimes quite literally by losing their lives, until more and more people come to the realization that we too are discussing right now, which is that unfortunately through this moral, purely non-violent and non-revolting approach towards improving or eventually replacing the system, nothing really can be achieved. nothing significant enough, at least. And whenever there are movements that are again based on certain moral principles, which are absolutely beautiful and progressive and so on, the system itself, I'm currently doing research on making a video on the Red Scare, so I really dived into that. There are always both government and corporate apparatus in place, which will make sure that they strip that given progressive movement of any sort of resemblance of class solidarity and class consciousness, because unfortunately capitalism is very capable of engulfing pretty much any sort of idea into its own framework, and at the end of the day making a new branded soda can with that fucking slogan written on it. So same applies to the anti-globalist movement back in the day, and recent certain strikes that are directed at specific either events or specific industry categories, where those kind of movements do create a lot of buzz, and they do change things for the better very, very often. Unfortunately, from our Marxist perspective, even though we should be appreciative and supportive, obviously, we should understand that all of those movements can eventually be co-opted by the status quo, and they very often do so without not risking going too much into a random different topic. But what specifically I found during the civil rights movement back in the States, towards its end, when it was very obvious that a lot of the requests would have to be accepted by both the state, the country, and big capital when it comes to, again, civil rights. There was massive money, but I'm talking billions, put into programs which made sure that radical and class-based movements die off, and that the leadership of different civil rights movements at the time is replaced by what back in the day, that piece of shit president whose name I'm not even going to mention,
McGovern?
called black capitalism. That's the Nixon thing.
Oh, Nixon. Okay.
With McKissick and the other people are kind of taking over the movement and saying, yo, we can do this inside of capitalism. We can achieve, minority representation, et cetera, inside of capitalism. What we see now in 2021, that's fucking bullshit. People are getting killed left and right. So yes, I'm just using that as a broad and massive, and I'm not doing it justice, example of how something that is so obviously infused with anti-capitalism, that's something so beautifully righteous, but not from a moral perspective, but from just the material, logical perspective and analysis, can eventually be co-opted by the system. And if we do not stay
100%.
rooted in again, I keep repeating the word material analysis, we risk devolving into something that intentionally we wanted to fight.
Yeah, well, I think just because of the subjective nature of ideals, they're just very co-optable, and there's really no better example than the green movement. I mean, the green capitalism.
Yeah, Jesus fucking Christ! Don't get me started on that shit. Yes,
it's
continue. Yeah,
it's so bad. But you mentioned there is a lot of debate as to how involved the CIA were in kind of actually helping cultivate a sort of pseudo resistance, new left, to kind of combat like a Marxist left. I don't know enough. I'd probably wait till your Red Scare video to really dive on that. But I do know, we can tell is that a lot of the hippie movement, especially in the United States, was very synthetic. I mean, unlike France, which was actually threatening to overthrow the government. In the case of France, I see the 1968 protests. I think the students were very radical, and actually it was the Marxist parties who were at fault, but kind of in America who are at fault for not really adapting to the cultural times. But I think in America, it's the opposite. It's America, the And you could say to an extent, probably like the UK, but a lot of the new left was like this hippie left that was talking about equality. And, there's that famous poster, I think that symbolizes it, where it says, I think, don't make money. What was it? It says, don't make money, make love or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just kind of defeats the whole point of like leftism. Because, like people who have this stance probably already have money. So that's why they can say that, right? Like,
Yeah, and I
it
need
sounds
money
pretty...
for condoms, bro.
Yeah. They need money for fucking psychedelic drugs. But it's like, it's so ridiculous is that, it becomes this moralistic idea of, modesty. And you see this with minimalism. I think minimalist movement is the sign of this, is this sort of movement to kind of, help the climate just by living super modestly. But what this super bourgeois fucking view doesn't account is most people have no fucking choice and live way more modestly. It's not out of a choice. It's because they're like literally in poverty, can't find jobs, or having to work multiple jobs to pay rent, and are usually also in debt for things like healthcare or education or other things, childcare. It's
leave it to rich people to make poverty into a fucking trend.
Yeah, and what's another sign of this too is like the fact that a lot of some aspects of the radical left, their first instinct is to build communes as like a resistance, and that's just not a resistance. It doesn't challenge anything.
But it's escapism, bro.
It's literally escapism. I mean, okay, so there's this Marxist sociologist. I don't want to name drop too much, but there's this great Marxian sociologist, Eric Olin Wright, who has this he has a lecture where he talks about 4 ways to challenge capitalism. So there's, making capitalism more friendly, which is social democracy. Then there's escaping capitalism, which he says is anarchism. And I think it's a little unfair. There are some like real anarchism in history that does challenge capitalism, like, Catalonia, Spain, Ukraine, and other aspects. But like anarchism in the West, let's be honest, is a fucking meme a lot of the time. Like it is escapist. But, and then you have smash capitalism, which is kind of like a Leninist Marxist. And then there's, I think it was accelerate capitalism was the 4th one. Right? But let's not get into that. But I think there is this sort of view where the way I kind of want to use this as a segue to go into the second aspect of that video we were talking about, how capitalism sells poverty is modesty, is why equality isn't really a practical goal. Not that we're anti-equality, but equality, just to be factual, is not the goal of Marxism, because, as Engels puts it himself, and how do you define equality? You can never really achieve perfect equality. By making some things equal, you make other things more unequal.
Exactly.
And whereas the goal of Marxism is actually, well, let's just summarize it in Marx himself, is teach according to their ability, teach according to their need. It's freedom. So it's like to live, without having to, only work just to meet basic needs. You want basic needs to be met and to have enough abundance where people can have these needs taken care of, and to have the freedom to kind of have the self-determination over one's life economically and politically. It's not just this perfect equality. So I think, like, I would like to see, what are your thoughts on that? And for the listeners who haven't seen Ugopnik's video already, I would check that out, because it's pretty good. It makes that point, which, is surprisingly rare on even the Marxian left, in my opinion, despite that being like a obvious common sense thing in Marxism.
It really is. And thank you. I guess it's very common amongst a lot of Marxists to believe it, even though it's talked about in numerous occasions, both by Engels and by Marx, because at one point we start genuinely believing anti-communist propaganda ourselves. A lot of people like to say that, the name of socialism has been covered with filth because of certain things that happened in the Soviet Union, or anti-communist propaganda during the Cold War, or myths created around it. Well, the third point, I think, takes a big chunk of that pie, and a big chunk of the pie is taken by that specific myth that socialism indirectly wants everybody to be absolutely equal. They kind of played a really good hand on us, not saying like an organization, but reactionaries, conservatives, right-wingers in general, by quite literally letting us run around and say this shit, not knowing that it's going to come and bite us in the ass. No matter how chic it is and how many advertisements you see it today, complete equality and fighting for absolute equality is not really something that I believe almost anybody wants. They handed us this pill covered in shit and said, socialists want absolute equality. And we took it and we thought it's going to help get more people on our side. We were like, okay, it's kind of complicated to explain all these specific Marxist things. Let's just say, Marxists want equality and everybody's going to like that idea. No, nobody fucking likes that idea. Only fucking losers want to. But again, this is a capitalist fucking notion. What is a loser? A guy who doesn't have money? He doesn't have money because of 1,000 different factors. He's not a fucking loser. But you get my point. Only the most disenfranchised would at some point want absolute equality because that would allow them to not starve to death. The vast other majority absolutely do not want this. Or they actually actively want to be much better than others in their specific field and in what they find passion in. And that is absolutely fine and in no way counteracts with the Marxist worldview or what Marxists want to create in general. Hell, quite to the opposite, by giving the fucking tools and value in the hands of those who actually create all these beautiful things that we see around us. They will be able to express their themselves far better and at a much higher stage than they do now.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing, that a lot of conservatives who think that Marxism is just this idea of hating rich people and poor people good, rich people bad. I mean, I think there's a PragerU video where they literally say that, and Peterson says that too. He says, well, the problem is about Marxism is you can't have equality of outcome. You always hear that argument. And the irony, right, is that equality is not a principle that derives from Marxism. It derives from liberalism. I mean, you hear that in, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or even something like the Declaration of Independence in America. You have, it's a liberal.
Yeah, sorry.
It's it comes from it's a liberal idea. It's like the idea that we have all these equal rights, and equality, of course, is used in many different ways. Equality of outcome. I mean, I haven't really seen anyone who is remotely a socialist as a theorist advocate for equality of outcome. It's not everyone equally poor; it's everyone equally better. Well, obviously, the rich people won't be better in socialism, but the point is that it's, first of all, it's giving the power to the people who actually do work. That's the horror of capitalism. The horror of capitalism is the fact that work, the people who do work, some of the most drudgerous shit in the world, aren't fucking rewarded for it, and they don't own what they fucking do.
Absolutely. I think we came to a very, very logical conclusion that absolute equality is both non-Marxist approach to, for lack of a better word, I use a gamer word, world building. And in instances in which it did sound like a potentially useful tool for, rallying people around socialism, it fired backwards massively. So we should, I wouldn't say actively be against it, because that's just bad optics. You're sitting at a couch or at a dinner table with some friends, and someone who says, I'm a socialist, I'm for equality. No, we're not for equality, fuck equality. That also sounds pretty fucking bad. It sounds like a goddamn psychopath. But but at the same time, it is something that, especially when sitting down and talking to people who you know are relatively experienced Marxists, who dive into that topic and kind of understand the more intricate complexities of the idea in general, which never really presented that as an end goal.
Yeah, and that's sort of the point I like to make is I'm not saying we should abandon morality completely, but what I actually advocate for is just not using liberal morality.
Well,
I think it's really more liberal morality ultimately benefits, the status quo, the people who have the most power already. And what I advocate is the socialist left should have its own morality, but more importantly, its own material analysis. I'm not saying like morality is always bad. I think for the most part, it's just not productive, and it's actually, detrimental, in my opinion, would use the oppressor's morality, which in this case is like the neoliberal status quo. And some people might say, "Oh, that's not true liberalism." I always hear that's from like left liberals. Mm-hmm. It's not true liberalism. Neoliberalism is, it's not egalitarian, but actually from its very inception, liberalism was advocated by bourgeois slave owners. Like John Locke had investments in the slave trade. Like he was very much an elitist. Also, he thought, that colored people did not possess reason.
Atavistic attributes, I think, is the specific thing he used, which is kind of calling them non-Homo sapiens. Yes, please continue.
Basically, yeah. Like, I mean, that's essentially what they're arguing. Like, liberalism from its inception was really used for a way for the emerging bourgeois classes, the emerging property-owning class, to kind of defend themselves against the crown, the aristocracy, the king. It wasn't to emancipate the underclasses of society. That's not what it was ever. I mean, maybe there are some people like Rousseau who are much more sympathetic to the working classes, but that's not the majority of liberals. And that wasn't certainly not the liberals who actually had power. Bourgeois farts at the end of the day. Like, this is where liberalism comes from this. So to me, it's not something, as some people say, it's not true liberalism. It's not true liberalism. Rather than just trying to reclaim liberalism, I think we should really look at things like Marxism. I'm not opposed to anarchism either. I'm more of a Marxist myself, but it's these things kind of really detract from, they're an advancements of liberalism. That's why they exist, especially in the case of Marxism. It's the reason why I think that anyone should really read, especially on the left, Socialism, Utopian Scientific by Friedrich Engels. It differentiates the idea of socialism being based on ideals versus material reality, and they call it scientific socialism for a reason. Now, I have issues, the postmodernist in me, I guess, a little bit of postmodern influence in me, takes issue with the word science when applied to political science.
Yeah.
But the point is that Marxism is as empirical as you can get to a political ideology, because it doesn't start with abstract ideals, abstract morals. It starts in concrete reality and tries to go from there. So that's why I like Marxism. That's why you like Marxism. And I think a lesson that all leftists should really learn. So it's not that, as you said, we shouldn't be anti-egalitarians, and we're not like Friedrich Nietzsche. Like, see, this is where the difference is I'll take influence from Nietzsche's critique of Christian morality, which, as we talked about, I think is present on the political sphere today in a secularized form. It's not that we should be an aristocratic douche like he is, but it's more that our goals should be more concrete than that. It should be creating abundance, reducing work time, having ownership, working class ownership over the means of production. It's not just this abstract idea of equality, right? I mean, a liberal could get in power right now, give everyone UBI, say, see, that's equality. Everyone gets equality of outcome.
Right? Yeah, and they would argue from their moral perspective that the equality of outcome has been achieved, and then everybody who wants something more can create more by choosing to participate in the work market. But obviously, I think, especially if your audience listens to you is already very, very well informed and intelligent, that doesn't work that way. UBI, I don't think we need to we need to go into criticizing it specifically, but definitely not only UBI, but many different approaches. There's more women CEOs. That means that women are absolutely fucking equal. There was this black dude who was a president. Black people, your life is great now, right? This is all fucking modern capitalist, usually liberal morality, which takes and kind of bends lots of different theories into its own little model and presents it to the public as what it perceives it as. So it could be problematic to be actively saying fuck you to that. We can, be edgy and stuff like this. It is still very important to how do I say this without risking repeating myself, but it is very important for a Marxist to differentiate between these two things: the material analysis and moralizing over fucking everything.
Since we are talking about morality, I think it's useful to let the listeners know where at least I derived a lot of my analysis of morality, and that is Nietzsche's idea of slave morality. Now, Nietzsche is definitely no egalitarian. He's not a leftist, but he's also not a fascist or really a right-winger either. I tend to look at him as not even a political thinker. I just look at him as like a philosopher, a skeptic of the highest order. And I think his idea of slave morality is useful because it applies to some aspects of the left. So when Nietzsche was using slave morality, he was analyzing essentially Catholic Christian morality in that the way it viewed, it was it kind of denied life. So it was a self-denial, and it did kind of reinforce this idea of modesty. So what slave morality is instead of adopting the master's morality, so the master's morality is the opposite. It's self-gratifying in a way. It does what they want.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically the master morality, it's defined simply by what is good. So like it's in a positive sense, is I like this, I will do this. This benefits me. This is, and it embraces a kind of will to power. You can maybe say there's problems with that, but the difference is a slave morality, rather than having morality of its own, it creates its morality sort of as an antithesis of whatever the master morality is. So everything that becomes associated with the master is bad, and you should, oppose it. Your morality is just the opposite of that. And it ultimately denies you the positive. So the slave morality is kind of a negative in this respect. So like an example, at least when it comes to Christianity, is that it was like living lavishly bad, living modestly good. You go to heaven. For Nietzsche, this is self-denying because you're denying the desire, denying what you want. You're denying the will to power and using this morality to justify that. I see that a little bit on the left with a couple of things, most notably the will to power, is that for the left, because violence, for example, is defined a little narrowly, is associated with the ruling class, the police, the oppressors, the bad guys, the left must always be peaceful. We have to hold ourselves up to these moral standards and be the better person. Because the oppressors, they use violence. So violence itself must be always a bad thing. And the left should always be peaceful. It should always be democratic, should always be cordial. And, it's a bit like the love thy neighbor type of ideology. And what this ultimately does is it just reinforces the same power dynamic. And it sort of acts, the way I just like to call it is slave morality is ultimately cope. This is cope, a way to cope with, and not ultimately change the power relation, because I think the left should adopt the master morality is, we people who do work for a living, we want to own our fucking work. We want to reap our benefits, not just, I'm modest because I live fucking modest, in poverty or whatever. That's not what we should be aiming for. So I think that's something to elucidate. I know you have a fantastic video about violence, why violence against the status quo is self-defense. And it does an excellent job of reframing this idea of violence as solely a negative, immoral thing, and how in reality it's a reaction.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the beautiful way in which you introduced both the arguments that I make and that Nietzsche makes. And it's so funny that slave morality has diluted into so many aspects. I just want to touch on that before we go into violence specifically, that for some reason, absolutely anything associated with the class that we are fighting, the bourgeoisie, like, for example, dressing in a suit or wearing boat shoes or fucking buying a more expensive piece of clothing that's either very flashy or not flashy at all, or God forbid, I don't know, wanting to have a boat one day, is all associated with, these evil rich people that we want to fight. And therefore, every single thing that they participate in or that they took on and indirectly nationalized as a symbol of wealth, that is indirectly immoral, and that is indirectly something which we should be fully against. And it kind of creates this sort of inbred community of people where they are complimenting each other on how intensively they are rejecting absolutely everything which is associated with the class which is not their own, even though association of A with B happens through time and through again this master-slave dichotomy, in which the master ends up holding up certain aspects, and it's expected of those fighting the masters to be against absolutely everything that those individuals either consume or interact with or live as. Well, Marxists should, as you put it as yourself, not really engage into broader societal analysis on that basis, because quite literally we end up not really being able to identify with almost anything, because the rich have kind of co-opted almost everything that's relatively nice or cool or enjoyable. And we end up hurting ourselves as individuals, but also as a group, by telling ourselves that, we should not touch this shit because this is the shit that belongs to the evil baddie. And that then goes to a more, let's call it, radical extent when it comes to talking about this relatively taboo topic of violence, which has completely been taken over due to this exact sort of approach to morality, in which absolutely any step to physically counteract the current status quo is seen as too radical of a step and as something which is inherently problematic and inherently evil. While I like to make the argument, and I believe you would as well, that violence is only perceived as violence when it's directed towards actions which want to change things, but in contrast, not wanting to change anything and being a passive dog that enjoys the status quo, that is seen as non-violent inherently, even though we live in a system which causes so much immense suffering based on how it is built, not based on morality again, based on how it is built, that at the end of the day, one could make the argument that not engaging in reform, or in the best case scenario, from my perspective, revolutionary activity, you are at the end of the day causing more violence than you could, participating in more violence than you would if you would be using violence to fight the given status quo, which is already violent in itself. So the main argument that can be taken out of this combination of arguments, this pyramid of arguments, is that using violence against the status quo, which is violent in itself, that violence is self-defense.
This ideology of nonviolence kind of can act just really as a force of acquiescence, I would call it, in some ways. Maybe not always intentionally, but that's often the role it serves. But one point you mentioned, though, that I think is the most important is by not combating the violent status quo, you are enabling actually more violence. And I can't think of a better example of this than Salvador Allende's Chile. And the thing is a lot of, paradoxically, a lot of leftists will condemn Fidel Castro and Che Guevara because they executed some people in the Batista regime and committed violent acts. But, okay, we'll look at the difference between Cuba and a lot of the failed experiments of socialism, like Allende's Chile, Guatemala, and you could probably find a couple other examples, Nicaragua. But I think Allende's Chile is the perfect example. Allende is often praised, and I like Allende, and I think what he was aiming for is the ideal. But the thing is he came to power right through democratic election, and he did not persecute any of his fascist enemies. You know, it was very pluralistic in Allende's Chile. He did not persecute the enemies that would later overthrow him and castrate and murder and throw off helicopters. The socialists, trade unionists, and leftists as a whole, really.
That is a fantastic example, and we're not making an argument here that violence is good or that we praise violence in any way. Violence is one of the most disgusting things that one can experience, and I personally have experienced it to a very decent extent, and I am absolutely disgusted by it. But making the point that it is always wrong to actively physically fight something which is harming you, and that you should take the path of pacifism is both impractical and has been shown multiple times throughout our species' very long and turbulent history that it just doesn't work, my friend. Pacifism, unfortunately, does not. It might for the individual, so he can purify his soul and feel good about himself, but that will not be able to achieve great things for those in his community or the world in general. And I think nowadays we have a lot of tools which have been introduced both through tech, through big data, and through through the previous experiments which we had that when violence is actively used, it does not have to be used to extreme cases, to extreme lengths in which it was used back in the day. And
doesn't even have to take place towards people
at all.
And it can just be property, or it can be various other means. It can be hacking. It could be all kinds of things. It doesn't always have to be like hurting individuals.
That's exactly where I was going. It was beautifully put. Or even some more radical cases like, what was necessary. Okay, people can discuss this, but, the Soviets made the argument up until the 60s that it was necessary to put people in labor camps, shit like this. There is absolutely no need to do this right now, post-revolution, because honestly, there is no ideological glue that would make 95% of the population want to be counter-revolutionary to the same extent that it made them be counter-revolutionary back in the day. Like, for example, religious reasons, or them being super loyal to the previous monarch, or having a long lineage of family members that were loyal to the specific king, stuff like that. We don't have stuff like that right now. Nobody's fucking loyal to McDonald's and KFC, which at the end of the day is an H&M is everything that this fucking system is giving us. So the violence that might need to be sort of unfortunately used against counter-revolutionary groups or individuals is not going to be on the same extent as it was decades or even almost a century at this point ago. Because again, we don't really, nothing will necessitate it. But to say that it is morally wrong and to say that it is unnecessary is simply, unfortunately, incorrect.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. Is I think it's not an either or thing or a black and white thing where leftists or anything should like or do like violence. That's certainly not the case unless someone's just like a uniquely bloodthirsty person who just has a desire for destruction. But we can't act as though violence doesn't have context. I mean, and violence, as you said, is not even always defined simply just by physical violence. I mean, Angela Davis makes the excellent point is that there's all kind of violence. There's economic violence. Austerity is violence. Throwing people on the street via eviction is violence. Denying people health care is violence. We only talk about violence when it's resistance, when it comes from the oppressor as opposed to the oppressed. Like people burning down a fucking Target and McDonald's and they're saying, oh, violence is bad. It's a Target.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
And then Biden coming out and, I condemn every single act of violence, blah, 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 blah. But no, bro, you genuinely are not. You're condemning 2% of the violence. And it's usually, for some reason, always the violence being committed by the working class or by a certain minority, and never the violence which is committed by the bourgeois class.
The key thing we see is that they respond with violence before the working class even does anything. And when the working class resists, whether it's positive, peaceful or not, it is via violence. Like the perfect example is the damn hippie counterculture protests in the 1960s in America posed fucking zero threat compared to the French, who are actually blowing up cars and blowing up property. In America, you had like hippies who didn't even stand with like a real political stance, and Nixon sent like the National Guard.
Yeah.
Reagan did the same thing in the Berkeley protests. I mean, they don't care. The status quo doesn't care. So it's the idea that you can just like be the better person. I mean, so the way I like to say it is that someone, maybe a liberal, might say, well, most violent revolutions or acts of violent resistance don't work. Well, I'll say I agree. A lot of violent resistance and revolution doesn't work. But the difference is that all nonviolent resistance doesn't work.
Wow, I love that. Bravo.
So, like, if you can look at through history, is that there have been various revolutions, many failed violent revolutions, and many successful violent revolutions. But there have never been any successful peaceful revolutions. I know there's some people who think that that's the case. There's some people think that. We'll give really paradoxically terrible examples. They'll say Gandhi and they'll say Nelson Mandela in South Africa. But okay, Gandhi was assassinated and Nelson Mandela was put in prison. And South Africa didn't remove apartheid until Cuba and Angola threatened to invade. And there was tons of sanctions and tons of protests. It's not like it was just like pure peaceful. It's so naive. And also, here's the other thing, right? Is that it's not just the idea that this is somehow just a left. Capitalism wasn't even established without violence. Capitalism took so much, like all the liberal revolutions. The American Revolution, we never talk about that. The American Revolution was super violent. The difference is it was for rich people to protect their fucking slaves and land and private property. And it wasn't, via the working class. And granted, good things came out of the American Revolution is that, escaped British control and established what at the time was like more democracy. So, like, even Marx does not deny that capitalism was an objective progression in history compared to feudalism.
Oh, of course.
So, like, all these changes require some form of fucking violence. So, and Angela Davis, she makes the point that we shouldn't just look at violence as just a principle. We should look at like what the goals are. When you boil that down, it's quite simple. Let's look at, Israel and Palestine, since that's very relevant, right? Is people say, naive liberals will say, I support violence I'm against violence on both sides. I just want peace. And it's like, okay, well, here's the difference is Palestinians are doing violence in response to like a fucking aggression and occupation and settlers. It's not, it's not just it's the goals, right? Israel wants to occupy Palestine and essentially ethnically cleanse them. Palestine wants to survive. It's fucking different goals. So to me, it's one thing to be against violence in principle, and to be absolutely against violence at all costs in practice. Because I mean, it's just we cannot ignore the context. I guess this boils back down to what we were originally talking about, the difference between socialists, Marxists, is we see these conflicts as through material, objective reality, circumstances, whereas liberals look in ideals. And if you look in ideals, of course, you can be against violence.
Any sort of violence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas we look at the fucking context, and that's what matters, right? I mean, it's I'm against Kantian liberal secular secular religious morality, as Nietzsche criticized Kant for. Kant famously said that he was against the idea that the ends justify the means. For him, it's just the means should be justified. Like the means are what matter. The ends don't matter. I disagree with that significantly. I think the goals definitely matter.
They do. They are what defines the tools used as either adequate or inadequate. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to sound like I'm a utilitarian or whatever, but a hammer can be used to build a house and to fucking kill a motherfucker. So violence can be used to create an objectively, materially better society for the working class from the perspective of the working class, or it can be used to suppress it. Depending on the manner in which it is used, it either helps one group or helps the other group. And that is, at the end of the day, very simplified version of everything that we have been talking about here, for the past 15 minutes. If you use it to advance your people's goals, at the end of the day, that's what is unavoidable and necessary. And when it is used against you, it should be fought, because again, it is trying to push you even more down than you already are. At the end of the day,
to the liberals who want this perfect nonviolent utopia, give me an example.
Yeah, and they won't be able to, or they'll give you, as we previously said, very stupid examples like we defeated racism by putting Obama in office. Nobody had to die for that. Even though one could argue that, yes, a lot of fucking people had to die for that. It's called the fucking Civil War, and then it's called the fucking Civil Rights Movement, and then it's called the fucking everyday life of just being a minority in the States. But yes, it would be a nonsensical answer to a very, very sensible black and white at the end of the day question.
Now, moving on to another topic, which is related, but it's regarding tactics, optics, and left-wing strategy. Do you think this liberal morality that haunts the left superego plagues our strategy?
Oh, it definitely does. As we mentioned in multiple cases previously, by using the very, very specific things, aspects, goods, and experiences, and by molding them in such a manner in which to introduce the idea that a socialist should be against them only because they are currently given the context of belonging, quote unquote, to the bourgeoisie or to people with a capitalist mindset and so on. It literally takes away so much bargaining power out of the socialists' hands without really doing anything, just based on words, pretty much. So yes, I mean,
virtue
obviously
signaling.
Yeah, in general. So like, yeah, I don't know what exactly else to add.
Well, this is something interesting, is I've had this conversation with a few leftists in university. I've advocated that the left needs we need a socialist Trump, and what I mean by that is not someone racist or stupid or a billionaire. What we need is a kind of socialist who can talk smug, who can talk shit, who isn't soft, and frankly, like, I don't want to use the word alpha male because it sounds like all cringy, but you know what I kind of mean, like, who has that will to power. Yeah, exactly. But like, and we have plenty of examples like that. I think Fidel Castro was that. I think Malcolm X was that. You have many examples throughout history.
Who the fuck said socialists are supposed to be nice? Who the fuck said we should be soft? Yes, a lot of us who want to be soft and nice should be able to be so. But there is plenty of room in a time which requires extreme hard action for people who are going to introduce that aspect and who have it in their own character.
100%. I've always felt that Bernie Sanders and Corbyn were way too soft. And some people say, oh, Bernie Sanders being like really peaceful and a gentleman, that's his strength. I strongly disagree. I actually think Bernie Sanders was his best when he, yeah, he's like, my friend Joe, my friend Joe, like, he's not your fucking friend. He put you through, he like raised the jail sentences of black people significantly. He's not a fucking good man. He's a decent man. I hate that. And Bernie Sanders, in my opinion, his main strong point was actually when he was like a cranky old man, when he was like more harsh towards Hillary Clinton, actually, when he was kind of at a certain points. He wasn't harsh enough, but points like that, I think, was when he resonated with the working class a lot. It's not so. What I like to say is, Trump, despite not being a working class person by any means, the reason why I think he resonated with not all aspects of the working class, I don't want to generalize, but certain aspects of the working class, like in the Midwest, I think is just because he talked like a regular person. It's not like there's this idea that are the working class stupid? No, it's just that most people don't want to talk in fucking platitudes, they don't want to talk like politicians or even talk like academics, like people.
Yeah, exactly. And some people, different people respect different types of people, and some really are into having a leader which is with the character and expressiveness of an individual like Trump. Others like the silent bad guy or whatever, which is people who end up voting for Putin. Other people want this sort of personality-less drone, and they vote for Merkel in Germany. So I don't know. It depending on the voting body or the revolutionary body, in an even better case, different sort of approaches to leadership can be taken. Unfortunately, right now in the Western English-speaking world, both in the US and the UK, we have seen that a chill, laid-back uncle sort of personality, such as Bernie and Corbyn, does not work. And I genuinely believe that especially young socialists want to see a motherfucker who's fucking pissed, and who's not hiding that he or she or them are pissed. And they want to see a leader who is openly both partially aggressive, both in what they say and what they believe in, but also somebody who doesn't take bullshit and who is very open to putting certain people in their place when that's necessary. And this sort of obsession, which again goes back to fucking slave morality, of us associating a very verbal, very outspoken, and sometimes even aggressive person with always negative morality, is only hurting our movement, because a lot of people, and look at us, look at socialists and leftists in general, and call us fucking snowflakes, call us this and that. And even though that's wrong in 99% of the time, there's a reason why this sort of rhetoric came to be, because
sometimes it's right.
Yeah, because we're so fucking afraid of everything.
Yeah, it's true.
But the original socialists fucking blew up government buildings, guys. Like, this is not a movement that is made up of these passive people who are just waiting to be fucked from left and right. Even though that's a very nice thing to sometimes want to do in personal life, but not politically. You know what I'm saying? So remember that, and we are not the fucking ideology of the quote unquote always good guy. We are the ideology of people who see this given system and are saying, yo, a lot of shit could be improved. A lot of this shit is outdated. Let's fucking change it, and let's stop this eternal constant fucking of our class by the other class. A very non-consensual fucking.
I hate to use this term, but the left is cucked.
Very
Absolutely
often.
cucked.
It's a proper
And I
fucking
mean that.
term.
I mean that in many senses.
The right is also cucked, but the right
I use
cucked
the.
in general. But we
Oh,
we are
the thing
not
is,
cucks and became cucks. Sorry, yes.
I will say the right has always been cucked throughout history, but the difference why I don't use the word like cucked implies they enjoy it, whereas I don't think the right even knows they're getting cucked. You know, like they're just like the right wingers don't even know they're getting cucked. You know, like
Oh, that's beautiful. Like, true. Yeah, there is a distinction.
There's that famous quote, right? I forget who it comes from, but it's like the American right, there is no working class. There's billionaires and aspiring billionaires. So it's
exactly.
Like that's often the way the right view themselves. They're totally cucked, right? It's like the fetishization of billionaires and stuff. Like, oh, Elon, daddy, you know, they're totally cucked. But what I mean, the left is that the thing is we have the right arguments and we have all the evidence. Yet you see left wingers capitulate time and time again, whether it be in terms of compromise or it just be in terms of rhetoric. Like I remember Bernie Sanders at his strongest when he was saying, I'm angry because people in America are angry. He had like this strong point, but then later he capitulated to Hillary Clinton when he said, I'm tired about hearing about your goddamn emails. And it's like, well, I'm not. Most people aren't. Like, that's a real fucking concern, actually.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in the case of Corbyn, there also is this the thing with Corbyn. He does come across as too much like a nice teacher. Like, you know, like he's the type of guy who is like the nice teacher who will tell you something nice. He'll comfort you. He's really nice, but he doesn't have I don't want to seem like insulting or anything, but like he doesn't have like the fucking balls to really like, you know, take down Boris Johnson. And you could see that in the debates, like a lot of moralistic arguments. And frankly, the biggest thing I think we should learn from Trump is that we should play dirty. There's this idea that, and the people who always argued against my idea that we need a socialist Trump, they have always said, but Trump has bad manners. We need to be better than Trump. We're not like uncivilized like him. He is, you know, he has like, he's bad manners.
Who says?
He's rude. Rude. That's the big thing.
Who says we can't be rude? Who says?
Exactly.
Fuck you. Who says? Who says we can't play dirty? Who? I mean, see what playing clean has done for us, huh?
It does
fuck off with those fucking arguments. That's what I would tell your friends.
I think this is why movie is also ingrained this kind of like slave morality too. Is you always see like the movies that whether they portray the superhero who always takes like the path of always like being the better person and the good always wins. This idea, the good always wins, the evil guy always gets punished. That's just not fucking true. Like, I'm pretty sure Pol Pot never got murdered.
He's still alive, hanging out with
Hitler killed himself. Like, what do you mean? Like, the good always wins. Like, yeah, the left is using this kind of modesty, morality. I think, you know, the left should play dirty. I remember when I was watching the debate with Bernie Sanders and Biden, it pissed me off because Biden's is so slow, like so, you know, just a terrible guy. He's so easy to make fun of. He's so easy to roast. Trump is so easy to roast. I mean, like, you know, like there's like multiple prostitutes he slept with who says he has like a tiny like micro dick. Like there's so many things, or the fact that, you know, he has deals with Saudi Arabia, the fact that he's a failed businessman. And like, if he didn't even start his businesses and just invest in a bloody index fund, he would be richer than he is. Like, dude, the guy's a failure. You can insult the shit out of that guy.
It's a script that writes itself. And yet we choose not to read out the script because for some reason we are, we think that we are supposed to be, quote unquote, the better man. No, fuck off. I don't want to be the better man. If that's your approach, you do your approach. I'm going to do my approach, and let's see who helps the movement more or less. This sort of, again, I mean, I think this is kind of the main topic and the main thread throughout this entire episode that we've been talking about is moralism has been weaponized so hard against any experimentation that the left feels like it has to redo the same approach to change, or or never try anything new. Basically, we're telling ourselves, me hitting my head in the wall isn't working, but me hitting it with a fist would be immoral, so let's just continue hitting it with the head until it hopefully breaks one day. Sorry, but your head is going to break one day, because the other guy is not only hitting the wall with his fist, but he's hitting your stupid fucking head with his leg all the time, because he knows how the fucking game is played. And the socialists back in the day, to a much greater extent, I feel like, especially in the West, understood this, while today we end up restricting ourselves for no goddamn fucking reason.
Insanity is doing the same thing multiple times and expecting different results.
Exactly, товарищ, exactly.
Exactly. But it is pretty funny is that they'll always say, oh, what about, isn't it rude? You shouldn't okay, a perfect example is that there's this in the debates, there's one funny moment where the guy, I think his name is Julian Castro, he was like the Hispanic guy. Anyways, he called out Joe Biden. He said, are you sure you remember what you said?
Yeah.
Or he said something like, he had that funny thing where he kind of like made fun of like subtly Biden's, cognitive inability. And people were saying like, that's so like unprofessional. That's so bad. And it's like, well, actually, I'm pretty sure it's pretty damn important for a president of the United States to have a functioning brain. Like, that's what is wrong with calling that out? Like, it's so ridiculous. That's why I think, so this is some aspect of PC culture and some aspect of like political correctness. I do kind of see why the right hates. Now, some of the right are dishonest and they'll hate political correctness so they can say some racist shit. And I think racist shit is racist shit and you're just being a prick. But there is like a line of political correctness that is more just this ideology of politeness dates a little bit back to this like soft control of modesty,
What happened? Like, the left was the motherfuckers saying, for example, business etiquette makes no sense. You all motherfuckers are sitting in a fucking corporate room playing a fucking theater with all those fucking neckties choking all the air out of your brain. To today's left, which is pretty much advocating constant business etiquette. Absolutely everywhere we need to be very well put together, very eloquent, very kind, very professional, very direct, very without expressing emotion. The people who were revolting against pretty much everything are now for some reason trying to keep some sort of bloody status quo in things that are not even relevant to the struggle, because for some reason we began associating it, those moral principles to the struggle, which very often aren't even bloody moral principles. It's just we were raised in a very particular way by our parents, which are from a very specific generation, and we want to keep that fucking thing, the fucking train running still, even though it makes absolutely no sense. No self-criticism, no criticism of tactics, of strategies. We just, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but just keep banging that fucking head in the wall. Well, I'm sorry, but I fucking, my face is ugly enough as it is. I would rather not do that.
I think I should clarify is that it might seem like maybe people aren't aware is like that we're advocating that the left is too feminine and not masculine.
No,
but like I don't like the thing is I don't associate the will to power or what we could colloquially call assertiveness or alpha male, giga chad, whatever.
With maleness.
It's not maleness. Like the thing is, that is so that there's women who possess that. Like I'll give a perfect example is like plenty of badass fucking women throughout history who have done like real important shit and have a will to power. Rosa Luxemburg, Emma Goldman, plenty of women who have like, it's not, I would say like, okay, an example, how do I say this? It's passiveness is not a female or male trait. I just think it's like a denial of will to power. Like you'll have men who do this. There and there's women who do this. Then there's women who have the will to power. It's, I think it's just because of, I guess you could say, like patriarchy that a lot of what we think is feminine, like passivity, is imposed on women. and men
Exactly,
are expected to be a certain way. But like, I think these are independent of gender. It's just like a will to power. That's kind of our point, really, is that the left should not be. The problem is, as leftists, we sometimes are critical of the powers that be so much that we hate power so much that we refuse to even get it ourselves. And I think that's
put. Exactly.
That's something important. And I think a good segue is that we're talking about tactics, and it's the last topic I really want to delve on is a lot when it comes to left-wing tactics. We tend to kind of abide by this liberal morality that we're in this marketplace of ideas, and we should solely use in a professional way a rational argumentation, cite as many articles as possible, cite every source. And propaganda is associated with something that only the right should do. And we associate propaganda with lies as if it's like an antithesis to reason for some reason. And I think this totally screws our tactics. And it's ignorant of history that pretty much all successful political movements, both right and left, involved some form of propaganda. Like propaganda simply is the performance of power. It is trying to persuade people. It's not just having an argument and seeing if who agrees or whatever. You're actively trying to change someone's mind, and that's essential for any political movement to be successful. You need to kind of build a consent. You need to people need to agree with your shit, and sometimes that requires more than just like reason and logic. People aren't all rational fucking people. We are enchanted by aesthetics. We're enchanted by visuals, the way things are put, tone. And you had a great video called The Aesthetic of Evil, the Fascist Uniforms, which is kind of about like the Nazi aesthetic and how the uniform played a role in fascist propaganda. And that's something I want to ask you about is, do you think that propaganda, when it comes to aesthetics, is something that is solely exclusive to the right, or is it something that the left should learn from?
No, it's not in any way solely exclusive to the right, and it's not solely exclusive to absolutely any ideology. Aesthetics, which are ascribed a certain ideological connotation, are ascribed that a connotation through active effort. No aesthetic or item or object has ideological connotation until somebody or some group or some ideology does not take it as theirs. And through active communication, propaganda, advertising, call it whatever you fucking want to, until it doesn't take it as its own, that thing is indirectly staying as a political sort of object of nature. The two sticks being crossed had absolutely no symbolism up until a Messiah was put on there and stayed for 3 days and then died. And that became one of the biggest symbols of all times, the cross, which billions of people wear around their neck every single day. That little symbol was given a religious tonality and a religious sort of meaning, and then it became a symbol of the ideology, of the movement, of the religion, whatever you want to call it. In the same way, pieces of clothing, symbols, even lifestyles can be co-opted by a given ideology and can be used in order to actively spread the ideas of that given ideology. The Nazis did that with many things, and they were extremely successful in that. And they found they concentrated on that a lot because pretty much their whole ideology was basically fictional world building of, a bunch of little kids, little genocidal kids sitting together and creating this in their eyes, utopia, but in everybody else's eyes, a dystopia in which they were supposed to live. So for them, it was extremely important to take almost every single aspect of life and turn it into something that represents the Nazi ideal. In the same way, they did that. Capitalism co-opted hundreds, if not thousands, of different aspects of life and called them capitalist. Having fast food chains what is considered, for example, capitalist, having 1,000 brands of clothing, fashion brands, expensive shit.
Freedom, like freedom is totally co-opted by liberal capitalism.
Freedom, exactly. Democracy, the word democracy is almost always co-identified with capitalism as well, which is absolutely insane. Certain aesthetics, fashion, fucking cars, bro. Like, it's insane. Everything can be co-opted by a given ideology if done in a proper way.
Technology
Exactly.
is totally co-opted by capitalism. That's why you see some people will say fuck technology just because it's working for the capitalists now, not the working class. And they'll say screw technology, embraced nature,
and they're playing into their hands. Like, that's exactly
they capitulate to like anarcho-primitivism, which is like stupid. And it's also it's also slave morality too, right? We associate in this case, because capitalism is the master ideology, so it's the capitalists are the masters. So we associate technology because it's dominate, in their hands. They own that means of production. So we don't like technology because of that. But it leads to the mistake of denouncing technology itself, which is completely stupid. Because how the fuck are we going to create post-scarcity without technology?
That's a cool topic on its own. It's ridiculous. I mean, at one point, I try to stay as anonymous as possible, but sometimes, I buzz out my face and I post like a photo on Twitter stories or just when I'm going somewhere or whatever. And I remember getting like a ton of like unironic shit, not people joking, but unironic shit, because I wear my hair with a very deep undercut, right? Like almost to zero.
Because you have drip.
And then I have, I have slick back hair on the top. And everybody in the comment section was like, why do you look like Richard Spencer while you're wearing the Hitler Youth haircut? What the fuck? Like, you allow the Nazi to win when you give him a whole fucking haircut. We already gave him a super cool looking fucking symbol, which is the crooked cross, the swastika, whatever you want to call it. We gave him so many fucking things that now we can absolutely never take back because those disgusting animals fucking ruined it for the rest of us. Now you're going to start giving them fucking haircuts because that's the fucking haircut that they wear. I cannot now wear this haircut. It's absolutely insane. It's absolutely stupid. Same thing with somebody wants to wear a fucking shirt and a fucking nice pair of pants and shoes.
Yeah,
and oh my
bourgeois.
God, you look like a corporate bourgeois piece of shit. Like, concentrating on aesthetics and propaganda through aesthetics.
Dude, look at Tito. Tito had drip. Tito's
man.
Example.
It's crazy. Again, repeating myself. Almost any ideology can co-opt almost any symbol into it. And socialists also do that as well. Though socialists sometimes do not co-opt it because they want to, but because the right pushes something on them. The most ridiculous example is, for example, crazy purple-haired women, right? That the SJWs, that's how they look like. For some reason, wearing interesting and different, and in my opinion, very nice alternative haircuts has become like this leftist thing or whatever. Drinking soy, for example, even though I like how the left actually played with this. We played with this really well. Like were making fun of all of them drink soy, but we took it and we're like, fuck you, yes we do. It was
that was actually an example of kind of like
the proper way to go at it. The proper way to go at it. Exactly. But yes, aesthetics are incredibly important. Symbolism is incredibly important. Propaganda is arguably game-changing. And yes, the left can absolutely use these tactics. And while using these tactics, should not moralize over them. I think if you have a counter of how many times we said moral or moralizing in this video, it's over 1,000 at this point. But they should stop moralizing. There you go, another one. And instead use almost every tool at their disposal in order to push the movement forward.
Yeah, there's this famous quote. I think it's from Walter Benjamin, but it's like fascism is the aestheticization of politics, and I cannot think of anything more wrong. Because I think all successful politics is aestheticized in some way. Like, especially radical politics. Like we can't really compare the status quo, which doesn't really have to justify itself, with something that is revolutionary. Like I think there's two sides of revolutionary politics. It ultimately boils down to communism, whether it be anarchism or Marxism, or of some kind of Marxism, like including also you have Maoism, Leninism, whatnot, and pseudo-revolutionary politics. Like that's the way I like to describe fascism. Is fascism is like a faux revolution.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, beautiful.
It presents itself as revolutionary, but they both like we can't act like the Soviets didn't have cool uniforms as well, and they didn't have cool iconography. Like I think that's a reason why a lot of people, even so-called, I don't like to use this term at all, but like tankies. I don't know, the way I like to use the term tanky is not synonymous with Marxist-Leninists, but it's more synonymous with people who don't really study the history or the theory or anything, and just like find hammers and sickles cool, and they kind of put it in their bio or whatnot. But I think that's always inevitable. Is there's always going to be people who are attracted based on the aesthetics, and that's to an extent somewhat of a good thing, because I think you need aesthetics to attract people. Like I cannot think, like when you think about Bernie Sanders, there's some decent memes made, like the "Yeah, good, okay" meme or the Bernie versus Hillary meme, but there wasn't really a defining aesthetic for Bernie. And there was certainly not a defining aesthetic or even memes for Jeremy Corbyn. And it just
for sure. Well, Trump definitely had it with the red hats and
100%. Yeah, like the red hats, exactly. Like
this is fucking brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant and so simple. It's a fucking hat. Aesthetics and taking certain aspects of everyday life and indirectly telling people this is what is associated with the ideology can be a very useful tool. Though I have to put a caveat here: when you take certain things on, which is strategically smart, try not to call too many things as something that is not allowed in your ideology, because a lot of previous socialist experiments really overdid this by overstepping. For example, if we can use the Soviet Union as an example, by having forbidden types of art because they were quote unquote bourgeois, or by
Soviet realism definitely became dogmatic, 100%.
Yeah, and like you should push those sorts of things in your socialist society or be around the working class as the main beacon of society, etc. That's all nice, but then don't but at the same time don't go into things that are not really relevant for your ideology and shit on it, because you'll end up making far more enemies than progressing in any direction.
And also it can lead to cult of personality, a lot of stuff like that. Like we should be trying to build a consciousness, but I also see optics and aesthetics as like a strategy. In that regard, what I see is I think the way certain optics or symbolism, propaganda should be embraced is dependent really on who is the audience, who are we appealing to, what country we're in, what culture we're in. Because
exactly,
I have an opinion that's kind of unpopular among some internet Marxists, that I don't think hammer and sickles and like the red iconography is, well, maybe not the red iconography, but just the hammer and sickles are a good idea in like America and won't really be very successful. But in some countries, that was the symbol of power, like especially in some countries like in Europe and also even in the Middle East, is like the Soviet Union, and the hammer and sickle was a symbol of power, because that was like a successful achievement. Like that's the whole hammer, is like the hammer of the people's will, right? It has a lot of success in some regards. And the Nazi aesthetic, as you pointed out, was really successful for its time. But like you do see fascists nowadays in America, at least. Maybe we do in Eastern Europe and in Germany, maybe embrace Nazi aesthetics. But like in America, you don't see Nazis wearing, like brown shirts and black shirts. They're not wearing these
now.
swastikas.
They're changing the aesthetics.
They're wearing suits and shit.
Yeah, they're doing the same way that NSDAP did back in Germany in the 1920s. They are rebranding, creating something new, and that's the fucked up brilliance of fascism, because they understand it to a full extent, both how important aesthetics are, but
I think it's
also
because they
how
know their
easy
ideas
sometimes.
suck.
Yeah, very often. I mean, they are, I'm repeating myself from my video, LARPers. These dudes are
Yeah.
just LARPing some fucking weird, fucking fucked up quasi-scientific world that is based on literally nothing. And they fucking just go with it. And sometimes it's really funny to read some of their fucking shit, like Atlantis, that's where the Aryan race comes from. We need to fucking find the Holy Grail because it will be proven that only when Aryans drink from it, they live forever, while others, when they drink, their body will fall apart. Fucking shit like descending from wolves instead of monkeys, while the others are descending from whatever. Or, we were the first humans who came to this planet, and then by diluting our blood and mating with the local aliens, we created all the other fucked up races. Like, it's literally LARPing. It's like writing a fucking fiction book. But when they start from that sort of standpoint, that sort of foundation, it becomes very easy to integrate pretty much everything into their ideology, which is much more difficult for socialists to do, especially when we're fucking moralizing about everything.
I think because the right, I'll say the right, not just fascists more generally, know their ideas aren't actually that popular because they, economically speaking, usually just benefit the ruling class. I guess Nazism was a little bit different because it did use the word socialism, but in the case of Mussolini, he didn't even pretend really to be an economic populist. In most cases of fascism in history, which I think are more similar to Mussolini, like Latin American fascism, for instance, is usually quite overtly elitist, but that's why they don't even focus on the ideas. Like it's solely aesthetics. And I think that's why they do have better aesthetics sometimes, or better strategy, is because they know off the bat that their ideas suck. So they'll use aesthetics. But the problem is with the left is because we think our ideas, and I think like our ideas are just more like better and more sound and more material, more, scientific. But because of that, we think that because our ideas are better, that we will win by virtue of our ideas being better. So often in the left, we ignore aesthetics completely. And we presuppose this rational discourse nonsense. And I think there's also another trap because a lot of leftists who become educated through academia become a little bit detached from regular people. So they try to use their ways of talking. I know this is so obvious to me with, I think the Corbyn British left is a lot like Corbyn won over the vast majority of students, but he actually lost the rural working class vote to Boris Johnson. And I think that's such a big L that should tell us a lot about the mistakes. I think aesthetics are important also because we're so swarmed with aesthetics, right? So much of our life is like saturated with media and spectacle. I think there needs to be a bit of a hyper real, seductive aesthetic. And I think what we should learn is that the left should make propaganda art. Maybe we can call it to make it seem a little bit more less scary. Counter propaganda art is why I say the word art is not art, just like making paintings or drawing, making fucking sculptures of toilets or some bullshit. Like what I mean is like, or drawing pictures of kitty cats or whatever. Like what I fucking mean is that the way we should make our videos, the way we should make our music or whatever, like we can make all kind of media posters, messages. We can do it so in a way that's like appealing. Art doesn't have to be like grandiose and bourgeois. Like I think without sounding pretentious, we both make a kind of art. Like video making is art. Because art traditionally is not limited to painting. I mean, like films is art. I think like, this I might get some disagreements with this is like Steve Bannon has documentaries I think are art. They're completely wrong and completely stupid, like Generation Zero, completely like nonsense, he says. But the way it's made, it's like, it's fucking well made. It has like it's made to scare you. It's made to think like, oh, tradition is gone and like the liberalism ruined everything. It works. And I think that's why the difference between propaganda and rational persuasion, because rational persuasion only really works if the person wants to be changed. And as you know, our uncle Zizek tells us, is that ideology is powerful, not just because it works subconsciously, but it works because we enjoy our ideology. We are literally eating from the trash can of ideology. Like we want to believe our ideology is so it's like we want it. So a lot of people want it. So I think you can't just come out and tell people to read these books or to like send people statistics, or even no one's going to watch these long ass fucking video essays that are just like statistic after statistic.
Yeah.
People want to like, watch a cool like thing with like, that's entertaining, but also like, can change people's minds, and I think it should be applied to political campaigning. Like I think you see Trump, there's something enjoyable about Trump. It's not like his propaganda is not just like political persuasion. It's fucking enjoyable. And people could say it's all lies, but a lot of it is lies. But for my belief is that anything to be successful, it has to have a bit of truth. So like Trump, while he does lie a lot, there's some truth to like a lot of the stuff he says. Like there's a lot of truth. He'll say like, like crooked politicians and, the liberal the liberal elitists and, like there's a lot of enjoyment. And when he just sits here and makes fun of all these people like Jeb Bush, Biden, and Hillary, there is enjoyment in that. People want to enjoy that. And I think all these psychological aspects when it comes to propaganda, rhetoric, aesthetic, are something that all aspects of the left really lack. And like a lot of the time, the Marxists, I will say, is like, I think we have proved ourselves on this podcast that, we're very much materialists and oppose liberal idealism, but materialism can maybe explain reality, but it doesn't explain how people see reality, right?
Exactly.
The filters in which we interpret the world. Like materialism can interpret the world, but it doesn't interpret how people interpret the world, which is often not through materialism. It's filtered through all this like propaganda and visuals, aesthetics, all of that shit, psychological stuff. So I think, that's pretty crucial. And I think anyone should definitely go watch the Aesthetic of Evil by Ugopnik, because it describes Nazism didn't come from nowhere.
Thank you. Yeah, and not just aesthetics in general. To continue your argument with using Trump as an example, there are so many different tactics, so many different approaches that can be taken in order to help introduce a person to the ideology. For a lot, that is going to be, mundane academic reading and information and et cetera, et cetera. But for a vast majority of people, that is going to be the touching point, the thing that drags them, that pushes them into the ideology, can be many, many, many different things. Be it a video they watched, be it a leaflet they read, be it the hammer and sickle aesthetic, be it I don't fucking know, their buddy who called them to a conference in which they all sit down and listen to the local socialist party members. There's hundreds and thousands of different approaches that can be taken, and more importantly, not approaches, tactics that can be used. So stop moralizing over what tactic is good or what tactic is inherently, quote unquote, impolite or immoral or whatever, and quite literally try as many of them as possible. Previously, what I was saying about, we need some badass motherfuckers shit like this. Yes, absolutely. But also that's not me or us, I believe, saying that there's no room for what has been used up until now, which is a more softer approach, etc., etc. We're only saying, don't tell me not to use my tactics, you use yours, I'll use mine, we're on the same fucking team, but let's try and expand the tool set at our disposal. And right now, a part of that tool set, which is called, for a lack of better terms, which you said, fucking having balls or whatever, having courage, I don't fucking care what term I have to use, is what is lacking in the tool set. So why not try and tap into, for the lack of better words, I'm going to use a marketing thing, that demographic.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Yes. Some people might be apprehensive to that and say, oh, like, isn't that just playing into capitalism, the marketization of everything? But that's the thing, is we live in a marketed society and people are used to being marketed to. Like they're not used to, part of the reason why postmodern advertising even came to be is because before they were trying, you see this like, or like if you look at old Coca-Cola commercials, it would be saying, oh, it has this many calories of this. And see, they would try to make, you know, like factual lies.
Yeah, and now
to
it's about values.
Yeah, now it's exactly. It's like values. It's almost unrelated to the. It's completely like aesthetic and psychological, and I think people are used to being marketed to. That doesn't mean that, you know,
just how it is. You gotta do whatever you gotta do.
You have to adapt to a certain extent, and I think the way, like, we live in a, if we do live in a marketplace of ideas, we have to treat it like what it is, a market. If it's an idea, a marketplace of ideas, that means we have to treat it as if it's a market, not as if it's like a fucking academic conference, you know? So like,
exactly.
Like if it's that means to a certain extent, the aesthetics do matter. The way, the facts matter. I agree. The facts matter. Like, I think if you learn history, importantly, to me, history is the most important thing. If people learn like the context of prior socialism, the origins of capitalism, all of, like, various things in history, these are radicalizing, but the ways in which they're presented are very important. People have to get there, you know, like,
exactly.
So this is like, I guess what we tried to say and what we mean by propaganda. Because I remember once you tweeted saying the left, the role of the modern left-wing YouTuber is not a revolutionary, but rather the propagandist. We are the wall posters, right, of today.
Yeah.
Like what used to be the people putting up the posters, you know, the propaganda posters. And someone replied kind of like, you know, like saying, no, the left shouldn't do propaganda. We're not supposed to lie. We're truthful. But what they fail to realize is propaganda has nothing to do with whether you lie.
Exactly.
So like lying and truth isn't so binary like it is. The point is like the left does have the facts on its side. I mean, it just does. It has, the left doesn't have to make things up. It just doesn't.
It's got to present them in a varied number of ways. You know, you have different types of people that are struggling because of capitalism, and they are struggling in certain aspects more than some other people are in others. And it's our task to communicate what Marxism offers as a solution and communicate it towards those specific things which people are lacking in the given current system. At the end of the day, put extremely simply, that is the duty of a quote-unquote propagandist. Not to lie or change facts or whatever, just to know how to properly communicate something to the proper person at the proper time. That's it. As simple as that.
Yeah, 100%. That's the honestly, you ended it very well. That's a great way to end it, I think. So if you enjoyed this video, I would suggest to go check out Ugopnik's channel. So
I'm going to interrupt you, yes, because I'm going to share this. A lot of people, hopefully from my channel, are going to come here. Please check out One Dime's videos if you like my content and style and the direction I try to take you as viewers. I think you would love his even more than mine. They're beautifully made. His argumentation is absolutely fantastic. This motherfucker is like galaxy brain shit up in here. Every time I talk with him, he's an absolutely brilliant mind and a brilliant Marxist. Please do check out his stuff. Extremely underrated, and I know that's not going to stay that way for long. Genuinely awesome dude. Please check him out.
And yeah, it was lovely talking with you, Ugopnik. I'll definitely I'm sure you'll be a regular on this show just because
I would love to be. You
never run out of shit to fucking talk about.
This is an absolute pleasure, and looking forward to the next time.
The tragedy of our predicament when we are within ideology is that when we think that we escape it into our dreams, at that point we are within ideology.